Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. I appreciate you being with me so very, very much. And by the way, I cannot express enough how much I appreciate the wonderful comments, and especially in the private messages that I'm receiving with greater frequency than ever before, of people who tell me that these videos are being such a rich blessing in your life, that you are beginning to see the glory and the beauty and the unity of God's Word, and to begin to understand the Bible for the first time in your life. That it's no longer just a hodgepodge, and it's no longer a book of fear-mongering for our future. By the way, I hope you've watched my video from Monday on our current situation in America. It is entitled, Is America Doomed? Go there and watch that video, okay? Anyway, I'm sharing with you that Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13, which is an integral part of the so-called second section of the Olivet Discourse, in which we are told, hey, Matthew 25, 1 to 13 is without a doubt a reference to the coming of Christ at the end of time, the end of the current Christian age. And by the way, I had a young man tell me last week, he said, look, Preston, the Messianic age will end, but the gospel will not. Seriously? I mean, really? And this young man's eschatology totally belies that. His own eschatology falsifies that. Oh, perhaps I have more to say about that later. But anyway, so what I've been sharing with you is that Matthew 25, 1 to 13 is the same coming of the Lord with the angels in judgment in the kingdom as Matthew 16, 27 and 28, which is unequivocally posited for the first century. That in turn, Matthew 16, 27 and 28 is taken directly from Isaiah chapter 62, which was a prophecy concerning the consummation of God's Old Covenant dealings with Old Covenant Israel. Now that means this, folks. If it is true, as most scholars agree, that Matthew 16, 27 and 28 is the reiteration of Isaiah 62. And if it's true, and it is, that Isaiah 62 is a prophecy of the coming of the Lord for the wedding and in judgment, then that means that if the wedding has not taken place yet, we're still waiting on it, then we are still waiting for God's, or for the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Wait a minute. If we're still waiting for the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, then that means and that demands that Old Covenant Israel remains as God's covenant people today. And that every jot and every tittle of the old law, the law of Moses, remains valid. It's inescapable. Sorry. And the machinations and the desperate attempts to avoid that just simply don't work. They're untenable. Now then, I've been sharing with you that in Matthew 16, 27 and 28, we have the coming of Christ with the angels in judgment in that generation at the time of the coming of the kingdom. I've shown you how many, at least two of the futurist eschatologies divide those verses and say, Matthew 16, 27, yeah, that's the end of the world. Matthew 28, 16, 28, that's AD 70. Listen, there are many postmillennialists who take that position. But if those verses cannot be divided, if in fact Matthew 16, 27 and 28, in its prediction of the coming of the Lord with his angels in judgment at the time of the kingdom, in the lifetime of the first century, if that is the same coming of the Lord as in Matthew 25, then the Olivet Discourse is not divided. If that's the same coming of the Lord at the time of the judgment of the living and the dead and the kingdom of 2 Timothy chapter 4, then Matthew chapter 25 and the Olivet Discourse is not divided. Now, I want to share with you one more passage that drives this home in an undeniable manner. In Revelation chapter 11, we have the vision of the two witnesses. They're prophets of God. And they testify for 42 months. No man has the power to overcome them until their ministry is completed. And they're slain, and their dead bodies lie in the street of the city. Now, please catch the power of this. And listen, folks, if you got any question about who this city is, then you really need to do some serious study. And I say that with all due respect, okay? Their dead bodies lie in the street of the city, quote, where their Lord was crucified. Do you have any doubt whatsoever about where Jesus was crucified? You know, and I've had people try to argue, well, you see, Preston, Jesus was not crucified in the city. He was crucified outside, as if that was any kind of a valid, probative type of argument. It doesn't say in Revelation chapter 11 that he was crucified within the walls of Jerusalem. It says their dead bodies lie in the street of the city. Where? The city is where? It doesn't say within the city, but it says where the Lord was crucified. Now look, it's not like Golgotha was 20 miles outside of Jerusalem. And it's not like Golgotha was even a mile outside of Jerusalem. It's right there at the gates, right there at the walls. There is virtually, there is zero validity to an argument that says, oh, well, Jesus wasn't crucified within the walls, because the text doesn't say that. He was crucified. Jerusalem is where he was crucified. And when you've got Golgotha right there outside, immediately outside the walls of Jerusalem, yeah, he was crucified at Jerusalem. But to continue, that city is also called Sodom and Egypt, spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. Now notice it doesn't say their dead bodies lie in the street of the city that is spiritually where he was crucified. No. That's an abuse of the text, should anyone want to argue that. Ask yourself the question, what is the one city in all of the Bible that is ever called, spiritually designated as Sodom? You know, folks, pardon me, in my book, Who is This Babylon? I spent a good bit of time documenting this. There is only one city in all of the Bible that is ever spiritually designated as Sodom. Who was that? It was Old Covenant Jerusalem. Isaiah 1, 9 and following. Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel chapter 23. I was in a conversation with a guy years ago. He fancies himself to be a biblical scholar. And he just told me, he had read my book, but he just told me, he said, you're just all wet. He said, that's Rome. I said, then show me where Jesus was crucified at Rome. Rome is 1,000 miles away from where Jesus was crucified. And I made the point. The only city in the Bible that is ever spiritually designated and called Sodom was Old Covenant Jerusalem. He said, you are absolutely crazy. We were sort of kind of friends, so we could talk to one another back and forth. And I said, no, I'm not crazy. He said, there is no place in the Bible, very emphatic, There's no place in the Bible where Jerusalem is ever, ever, ever called Sodom. Now, there were 2 or 3 people standing around. And I just told him, his name was Stanley Paher, by the way. I just told him, I said, Stanley, you're wrong. Grab a Bible. And before we read anything, he took out a wad of money. I kid you not, it was that big. And he said, I'll tell you what, Don, you show me a verse in the Bible that ever designates Jerusalem as Sodom. And he said, I'll give you that whole wad. I said, seriously? I said, are you serious? He said, I certainly am. He said, there's not a verse in the Bible that says that. I said, okay, cool, let's grab our Bibles. So we read Isaiah 1, Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23. And he just literally stood there and stared at the Bible. And he looked up at me, looked back at the Bible. And I turned to a couple of fellows that were standing there listening in. I said, hey guys, did I prove my point? And both of them said, well, we had never seen it, but you sure did. That's undeniable. I held out my hand. I said, okay, pay up. He said, oh, I wasn't serious. I said, you said you were serious? And of course, he wouldn't do it. Now, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this great city of Revelation 11 is first century Old Covenant Jerusalem. I started to go off on a tangent there. Now, here we have this great city under judgment. Revelation 11:15. Then the 7th angel sounded. By the way, what would happen at the sounding of the 7th trumpet? The mystery of God, as foretold by the prophets, would be fulfilled. Revelation 10:7. The 7th angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. He shall rule forever and ever. Now wait a minute. What is this? This is the sounding of the 7th trumpet, which is the resurrection. And it's the time of the judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. And at that judgment, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. Folks, this is the coming of the Lord for the judgment, for the kingdom. The 24 elders who sat before God on their thrones fell on their faces and worshiped God, saying, we give you thanks, O Lord God Almighty, the one who was, who is, and who is about to come, because you have taken your great power and reigned. The nations were angry. The time of your wrath has come. Well, what is this time of wrath? It's the judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. And the time of the dead that they should be judged. Wait a minute. 2 Timothy chapter 4. The coming of the Lord for the judgment of the living and the dead was about to occur. And now here is Revelation saying the time has come for the judgment of the dead, that they should be judged. And that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Now, wait a minute. It's the time of the rewarding of the prophets. Well, let's see. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, we have the prophecy of the resurrection, which is the resurrection of Revelation in chapter 11, 15 and following. In Daniel 12, we have the time of the end of the age, the consummation. Revelation chapter 10 and 11, we have the time of the sounding of the 7th trumpet, the time of the end. In Daniel, we have the time of the resurrection. Revelation 11, we have the time of the resurrection. In Daniel overheard one angel ask another, When shall these things be? When shall all of these things be fulfilled? The other angel held up his right hand and his left and swore by him who lives forever and ever, and says, it shall be for a time, times and a half time. Oh, which by the way correlates perfectly with Revelation chapter 11. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all, not some, not a little bit, not even most of it, all of these things will be fulfilled. Then, in Daniel chapter 12, 10 to 13, Daniel was told, and now, Daniel, go your way. You shall rest until the time of the end. What time of the end? Until the resurrection. You shall arise to your inheritance. The time of the inheritance is the time of the resurrection. The time of the resurrection would be when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. Revelation chapter 11, at the time of the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the time of the end, the time of the judgment of the dead, the time of the prophets, I wonder if that included Daniel, that they should be rewarded. And the passage says, the time of your wrath. Well, you see, the time of his wrath is also the time of his rewarding. The time of your wrath has come. And so, we have absolutely perfect correlation, harmony, and unity. The coming of the Lord with his angels to judge in his kingdom of Matthew 25. At the time of the wedding of Matthew 25, 1 to 13, was to be, about to be, 2 Timothy chapter 4, 1 and 2. It was to be at the sounding of the seventh trumpet, and the time had arrived. Revelation 11. Just like Matthew 16, 27 and 28 said, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I'm sorry, folks, there's no way out of this. There's no escape from it. People can throw up clouds and clouds of dust and smoke, but it doesn't destroy the connections and the arguments. Hey, listen, don't forget, the month of January 2021, U.S. orders only. You order my book, Elijah Has Come, A Solution to Romans 11, 25 to 27, and AD 70, a type or a shadow of the real end, question mark, because you see, lots and lots and lots of commentators say, well, yeah, sure, no problem whatsoever. The coming of the Lord in AD 70 was a shadow of the yet future coming of the Lord. No, it wasn't. And free of charge, included in the price. Can you believe Jesus said this? Now, you go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and you look at the banner right up at the very top. Total delivered price, post-paid, all right? No refunds on postage, okay? Post-paid, U.S. orders only, $30. All right. Thank you so much for joining me for this morning's morning musing. Don't forget, tomorrow we will continue our examination, our refutation, and response to Kenneth Gentry's recent attack on my brand new book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? You don't want to miss that. I'll see you there.